1,200 employees up there in Bar Harbor, and some of the other ancillary businesses that are not located on the property because of the state-owned property. So things I would have never recognized. Like, for instance, there's a place that makes gloves for the cryogenics lab. Who would have ever thought that? There are other places that create or make all of the cages that they use for these mice. There are companies in that area who create the parts that are needed for the cryogenics, like the big things that they keep this stuff in. I watched them use this cryogenic stuff. It was amazing how many other ancillary businesses go to support a huge lab like this. So, but it's kind of hard to say. They're not located on the property, yet they are all manufacturers for parts that are needed to run the lab.
Well, they won't need any manufacture of cages for mice because they're not going to do mice
Right, but you asked for there. I'm just here. We've got colleges that are coming on board and a teaching hospital and things, but they can't do that on their property.
Excuse me.
Up there.
I asked for medically associated companies. That was my question.
Okay. You got an answer. Thank you very much. Commissioner Hallis.
I understand that this is a very, very touchy subject. But let me tell you, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've lost a huge amount of tax base in Collier County. All of us realize that, right, we have very reasonable taxes at this point in time. If we go through with this idea of Jackson Labs, there might be a slight increase in taxes, all right? Now hear me out. If we decide to abandon this whole thing, I want to know from you, the people here, how we're going to get sustainability. Now I've read a lot of emails saying that, well, there could be other companies that will come down here. Even in the height of the building boom down here, there wasn't that many people that wanted to move here to Southwest Florida. The reason being, it's at the end of the line. And I'm telling you, what we put into for the infrastructure for you, for the quality of life that you have here, we cannot retain this unless you want to pay a lot higher rates in property taxes in the future. It could be 5 years from now, it could be 2 years from now. We're looking at this as saying we have to figure out a way to reinvent ourselves. It's like the auto companies. Now, one in particular that did not take money, and I happened to work for that company, was Ford. They went out and basically re-engineered themselves, and now they're making reaps and benefits from what they have accomplished. That's what we here in Collier County are trying to look out for. We also want to make sure that young people that move into this community can also have sustainability here and make sure that as they have families, that those families are retained here in this area. So, you know, we can take a lot of flack all day long on what's good and what's bad, but unless you have all of the information on what's coming down the road, when we look at our budget and everything else, we have to make sure that we can continue to have the wonderful amenities that we have here in Collier County. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Will be Norrie Murray, followed by Dwayne Billington, and we can use both podiums, please.
Good morning. My name is Norrie Murray, for the record. Many of you should have received, all of you should have received an email from me regarding some questions that I think are really critical and need to be answered. I'm quite distressed to hear that the entire discussion this morning has to do with the funding. How are we going to get the money to get on with the state, match the state funding, or go out in front of the state funding if they disperse in increments? I don't think you did nearly enough research to discuss and find out the real probability of the success of Jackson's experiment in personalized medicine and the viability of their business plan. The Productivity Committee study was fabulous, and it told you the assumptions that were input into that study were overly optimistic, so the return on investment couldn't be validated. The addition of the University of South Florida and Edison College would have had no impact on that, Commissioner Coyle, because that study already assumed 7,000 jobs would be created, and neither of those institutions bring real private money. With respect to JAX alone, though, forget the cluster. JAX's business plan is dependent on NIH, National Institutes of Health money, for sustainability in the future. Given that, can you answer these questions? They're new to this business, Commissioner Coyle. You just said that. Who are the major competitors in the proposed field? How many years have each of the major competitors been conducting research in this field? How much experience does Jackson currently have in this field? We know that answer. None. How many scientists does Jackson have currently on staff directly involved in this research? Answer to that is none. Will any scientists currently on staff be transferred to Collier County? No. How much grant money has the NIH allocated to the proposed field in each of the last 5 years? Which research institutions received those funds? Have any of those institutions already in the field agreed to partner with JAX? How many grant requests in the proposed field did the NIH receive? How many did they turn down? How many did they choose not to renew? Can you name the research institutions, the out-of-state prestigious ones, that Jackson has had discussions with over the last 6 months, none of which have signed on as yet? Without the answers to the probability of NIH funding, and for those of you not familiar with the National Institutes, they're funded by federal money in the domestic discretionary budget, the budget that both Democrats and Republicans have targeted for cuts. Without understanding the funding potential or risk in the potential for the other funds, Jackson Labs could become a dependent of the County of Collier in perpetuity.
Mr. Billington.
Good morning, Commissioner. My name for the record is Dwayne Billington. I've been to every productivity meeting on this. I've been to every commission meeting on this. We've been told time and time again that this was vetted by the legislature. They looked at this carefully. Otherwise, they wouldn't have voted to fund it. Now we're finding out that that's not exactly totally correct. And I'll read directly from the backup. Enterprise Florida officials have indicated their economic analysis is still in process and their data analysis is only associated with the laboratory and not the biomedical cluster contemplated in the WEG report. Well, that's really interesting because if they're just looking at Jackson and Jackson's going to promise us 240 employees for the 260 million, it shouldn't take a real long time to do the math and determine whether or not that's a viable situation. It also poses a question, does this mean that none of the money coming from the state can be used for the biomedical cluster? And if not, who funds it? The local sales jobs for Jackson was substantially predicated on the findings of the WEG report that included the cluster. Well, there was an analysis done by a productivity committee, and they determined that even with the entire cluster at total build-out, best case situation, it wasn't economically viable. And I'm amazed we keep hearing the same kind of baseless arguments here in favor of this situation. You know, we're using gloves and critter cages to help justify spending $260 million. This is the height of ridiculousness. You have zoning problems out there, and this stuff just can't be done administratively, and some of it is very real questionable whether it can be done by a vote of this board or whether it's really going to require a DRI. Your exposure to legal challenge on this is absolutely huge. And I hate to see government by lawsuit. I would have hoped we had learned our lesson back when we had a little situation there with the clerk of courts, but time will tell how much we've really learned here in Collier County. That's really all I have to say on this particular item. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last speaker, right?
No, so we've finished now.
Okay, all right. What do you need, County Manager? You just need us to accept the report?
Yes, sir, that's the staff recommendation.
Okay.
Motion to accept
Okay,
the
a motion to accept the report by Commissioner Fiala, second by Commissioner Hallis. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by like sign? Okay, it passes unanimously.
Commissioner, that takes you to 10B on your agenda. It's a recommendation to adopt a bond resolution authorizing the issuance of revenue bonds for the Jackson Laboratory project in order to initiate a bond validation proceeding to determine whether the use of bond proceeds for such project constitutes a valid public purpose under the laws of the state of Florida. And Mr. Isaacson will present.
Commissioners, I really don't have anything to add to that. I think the information contained in the report is self-explanatory. We're here really to answer your questions.
Well, one thing you can add to it is that this does not get a bonding authority approved. It does not mean we are bonding anything. It does not mean we have made a decision to bond anything. It is merely an attempt to find out if it is legal to do that. Laying the groundwork if we have to make a decision later on, right? Not waiting till the last minute. Okay?
All of which are provided in your information. Yes, sir.
All right. Good. Commissioner Henning.
What's the repayment source?
Commissioner, that hasn't been determined at this stage of the game?
If you will, I think, Commissioner, what you're asking is this particular resolution, for simplicity, pledges your half-cent sales taxes. You have an existing master bond resolution that pledges half-cent sales taxes. It's one of the easiest pledges to understand, and it's been used the most throughout the state. And as County Manager pointed out, it's way too soon to know exactly how the credit would be structured if you decided to move forward. If you decided you had to issue bonds to fund a portion or all of this project, there's a lot of steps to go to determine how the structure of a bond would be and what the credit would be. So for purposes of validating the key legal issue, which we're concerned about, is the public purpose issue, this was the most straightforward way to accomplish that and to start the validation proceeding.
Well, I think we all know that we don't have enough revenue coming in from, the sales tax, gas tax, whatever. What tax? Gas taxes?
This was your sales tax resolution.
Sales tax revenue. We know we don't have enough. That's already obligated out to pay this bond.
Well, I don't know how much capacity you have for a sales tax bond, but we also don't know how much you're going to be asked to bond. I mean, if you're asked to bond $50 million, you might have the capacity. I don't have the financial analysis of that. When you issue the bond, whether you do it over 30 years, 40 years, whether you secure it with another layer on another revenue source later. So I can't answer that question, but for bond validation purposes, the court doesn't look at the credit worthiness of the bonds. They look at the legal issues related to the bonds, which is what we're concerned about.
Okay. This is not the actually issuing of the bond, this language in this resolution. That has to be a separate action that comes back to the Board of Commissioners?
Correct. What we've done with this resolution, again, to try to resolve the one fundamental legal issue that we believe is out there, is to do the minimum authorization, to give some preliminary authorization to issue these types of bonds or to issue revenue bonds for this project. Okay? If the validation were successful and the board decided to move forward and one of the funding alternatives resulted in you having to issue bonds, there would be several other steps for the board to make before that could be done, before bonds could actually be issued.
So if this is not, it's confusing. Who's to say that